Okay, so let's talk about the wonderful, rejuvenating and refreshing decision by the Swedish Academy to award the Nobel Prize for Literature to Annie Ernaux, the French writer. So on the evening of the 6th of October, I didn't do a live stream of the announcement, but I did do a live recording of my reaction to the announcement of the Nobel Prize for Literature. And initially, I was a little bit surprised and shocked that the Nobel Committee had chosen another European, Annie Ernaux. But that was perhaps a little bit shallow and callow of me, because as the announcement progressed, and as I began to learn more about Annie Ernaux, I think I discovered a writer who will be of interest to many listeners of the podcast, and a person of genuine enduring significance. Now, one of the wonderful things about the announcement was that on the night, and I didn't include this in the clip, the Swedish Academy had to say, as they were telling the journalists and the world and the assembled podcasters watching on YouTube, that they were announcing the prize, but they had not actually been able to contact Annie Ernaux yet by phone. And in a subsequent interview, Annie Ernaux explained how she, in fact, was, I think, doing some things at home, cooking or gardening or something like that. And that she, at one point, turned the radio on to find out who had won the Nobel Prize, because she was interested. And it was through that announcement on the radio that she found out that she, in fact, had won the prize. And there are a couple of short interviews with Annie Ernaux on the internet, on YouTube, etc. The Nobel Prize YouTube channel has a wonderful little brief interview with Annie Ernaux, which I think is conducted in English as well. There's clearly French ones as well, but and she's a wonderful character, very, in a way, humble and valuable. And I think I soon converted from an initial shock that, goodness me, there was another European winner of the Nobel Prize, to a real admiration for this choice of Annie Ernaux, who, as they said there, writes in I guess the tradition of Marcel Proust, another of my favoured writers, but in a very, very different way, and a way that emphasises, as they said, shame, but also what is almost a sort of anti-literature, a kind of a focus on using writing to investigate the self, and ethnology of the self, and one in which the self is as much formed through the passing parade of social convention and objects and memories, and not just personal, like individual memories, but memories that are passed from previous generations on to following generations, from one group of people to another. And this is very much a kind of pattern that she explores in her work, The Years, which I dutifully bought on the Kindle in the morning after the Nobel Prize, because someone had already reserved it from the local library. Now, in a piece on Radio France, which is in French, but you can do a kind of a machine translation, there's a bit of a good profile of Annie Ernaux, how she was born in 1940 in Lyon, and expressed in her literature her experience as a class defector from the family grocery store to the aggregation of modern letters and bourgeois marriage. From the small town of Yvetot in Normandy in the capital, and a tender and guilty tension that she explores in her literary work. They go on to comment that Annie Ernaux is very committed to the left as a writer, left of politics, and marked French literature with the autobiographical material of her writing. And autobiography is a particularly strong tradition in French literature. There's Proust, there's Michel Lirès, there's a number of major 20th century intellectual figures who really write this kind of ethnology of the self. And of course that even goes back all the way, I guess, to Michel de Montaigne, the writer of the essay. The Radio France piece goes on to comment that by dealing bluntly for a clear and suspicious writing of the seductive effects of language, of objects that could have been considered unworthy in literature, such as abortion or supermarkets, Annie Ernaux explores more broadly the themes of memory, relations of social domination, and of women. She says in an interview with France Culture, "For me, each word must have the heaviness of experience. I seek the density of words. Thanks to words, I try to thwart all this language that classifies and hierarchizes. This is why I never use the word modest, and everything that in language is likely to classify and prioritize. I feel it, I see it, and I evacuate it." And some people say she writes a kind of collective autobiography, and that's what they talked about there. And this is very much the case with her work Les Années, or The Years, which was published in France in 2008, but I think was only translated in English. If I check my the copy that I bought on Kindle a couple of days ago, in 2017. And this really gave Annie Ernaux more global sort of success, international success. And it was commented on in that little excerpt from the Nobel Committee that she, in this book, nowhere else does the power of social convention over our lives play such a significant role. It's been described as a sociological epic that evokes both personal memories and collective history from the 1940s to the present day, and is both autobiographical and plural. A story that is both autobiographical and plural, and that the author herself qualifies as an impersonal autobiography. She recounts through the descriptions of photos of the author the weight of conventions, their erasure, and how much she herself found it very difficult to recognize herself in the person she was. And it is from the book The Years that I'm going to read a short section of Annie Ernaux's work to give the authors of the listeners of the Burning Archive a taste for this wonderful writer who has been rightly honoured by the Nobel Prize Committee. And I didn't really know what to expect when I started to read The Years, but right from the very first epigraph page of The Years, where I was entranced, because there Annie Ernaux has two quotations, one from José Ortega y Gasset, who was a Spanish philosopher who lived between 1883 and the mid-1950s and was a kind of proto-existentialist in some ways. And he wrote the quotation at the start of Annie Ernaux's The Years proved instantly to have a connection to the burning archive. And Ortega y Gasset's words are, all we have is our history, and it does not belong to us. Truly an excellent, enigmatic epigram. And then there is a quote from Chekhov from, I suspect it's one of his plays, I'm not entirely sure, where he says, yes, they'll forget us, such is our fate, there is no help for it. What seems to us serious, significant, very important, will one day be forgotten or will seem unimportant. And it's curious that we can't possibly tell what exactly will be considered great and important and what will seem petty and ridiculous. And it may be that our present life, which we accept so readily, will in time seem strange, inconvenient, stupid, not clean enough, perhaps even sinful. And it's those themes of a history that is both constituent, like it makes us, forms who we are, but yet is also not something that we can possess, that is broader than us, that it also has its own sort of momentum, but is also hard to recover except through the work of memory and careful ethnology of the self, as Annie Ernaux practices. And you get a view of Annie Ernaux's style in the preface to the book The Years, and I'll just read from that. But before I do, because it won't necessarily be obvious, you get also a sense of the nature of the style. There's a sort of a general comment at the start, and then there are these sort of dash-started dot points almost, sentences that are tight, plain language, but precise descriptions of memory and snippets of culture, fragments of experience that are kind of just set down almost in a list-provoking memory, almost as sort of research notes into her own sense of who she is. Not only who she is, but who the collective biography, the people who she has shared those years with are. And it is it is that study of the post-World War II generation in France. Annie Ernaux being born, in the midst of the war and really growing up in life after the war. So she says so if I read briefly from the book, all the images will disappear. The woman who squatted to urinate in broad daylight behind the shack that served coffee at the edge of the ruins in Yvetot after the war, who stood, skirts lifted, to pull up her underwear and then return to the cafe. The tearful face of Alida Valli as she danced with George Wilson in the film The Long Absence. The man passed on a Padua sidewalk in the summer of 1990, his hands tied at the shoulders, instantly summoning the memory of thalidomide prescribed to pregnant women for nausea 30 years before, and of a joke people told later an expectant mother knits the baby's layette while gulping thalidomide pills at regular intervals. A pill. A friend says in horror, "Stop, don't you realise your baby may be born without arms?" And the other answers, "It's okay. I don't know how to knit sleeves anyway." Claude Pierre Plou, who leads a regiment of legionnaires, waving a flag in one hand and leading a goat with the other in a film with Les Chalots. The majesty of the elderly woman with Alzheimer's who wore a flowered smock like all the residents of the old folks' home, but with a blue shawl over her shoulders, tirelessly pacing the corridors, haughty like the Duchess of Guermantes in the Bois de Boulogne, and who made you think of Celeste Albaret as she appeared one night on television with Bernard Pivot. Duchess of Guermantes, just adding there, of course, is a reference to Proust's In Search of Lost Time. On an outdoor stage, the woman shut into a box, pierced all the way through by men with silver spears, and emerging alive because it was a magic trick called the martyrdom of a woman. And so it goes on. Many of these little dot points, which are, as she says, images, real or imaginary, that follow us all the way to sleep. They will vanish all at the same time, like the millions of images that lay behind the foreheads of the grandparents dead for half a century, and of the parents also dead, images in which we appeared as a little girl in the midst of beings who died before we were born. Just as in our own memories, our small children are there next to our parents and schoolmates, and one day we'll appear in our children's memories among their grandchildren and people not yet born. Like sexual desire, memory never stops. It pairs the dead with the living, real with imaginary beings, dreams with history. So one of the traditions of the Nobel Prize is that the winner delivers a lecture in Sweden on receipt of the prize, and this Nobel lecture is generally published, although there have been quite a few recipients who have either not delivered it in person or been unable to deliver it for one reason or another. But Annie Ernaux showed her integrity and did deliver the Nobel lecture. Let me just read two brief sections of that Nobel lecture as a way to sort of sign off on a fine winner of the Nobel Prize in 2022. She begins the lecture by saying, "Where to begin?" Obviously she wrote it in French, this is the English translation, but where to begin? I've asked myself this question dozens of times, gazing at a blank page, as if I needed to find the only sentence that would give me entry into the writing of the book and remove all doubts in one fell swoop, a sort of key. And she talks about her experience growing up as part of landless labourers, factory workers and shopkeepers, and how becoming a writer was for her a way of liberation and a way perhaps also to redress the social injustice linked to social class at birth. That was her sense of things. An individual victory, she writes, could erase centuries of domination and poverty, an illusion that school had already fostered in me by dint of my academic success. How could my personal achievement have redeemed any of the humiliations and offences suffered? And that desire to be authentic to that experience, I guess, shines through in Annie Ernaux's writing. And then towards the end of her lecture, she does say that she does not confuse the political action of literary writing subject to its reception by the reader with the positions I feel compelled to take with respect to events, conflicts and ideas. And she expresses concern that in today's world, where the multiplicity of information sources and the speed at which images flash past condition a form of indifference, to focus on one's art is a temptation. But meanwhile, in Europe, an ideology of withdrawal and closure is on the rise. She is concerned that this ideology requires a duty of extreme vigilance for me and all those for whom the value of a human being is always and everywhere the same. And so she sees her individual prize as a collective victory, something that she shares. I share the pride of it with those who, in one way or another, hope for greater freedom, equality and dignity for all humans, regardless of their sex or gender, the colour of their skin and their culture, and with those who think of future generations, of safeguarding an earth where a profit-hungry few make life increasingly unlivable for all populations. So thank you, Annie Ernaux, for your wonderful contribution to culture